and welcome to the International Center Goa. We have with us Nitin Pai, director and co-founder of the Takshila Institution in Bangalore. And very quick introduction. Nitin is primarily works in the area of public policy, broadly speaking, but he is an engineer by training. He did his bachelor's in engineering from the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, and then went ahead and got a degree in public policy, a master's degree in public policy from the National University of Singapore. He has been since his return to India. While in Singapore, he worked with the Singaporean government for about a decade in various areas, and then returned to India where he co-founded the Takshila Institution. His institution is currently doing a program here, so we were lucky to have him come on his own. And this book for which we have put together this program is the Nitopadesha, is a translation, and it's a collection of stories. You have various animals involved, and I was telling Nitin earlier that look, I haven't read such kinds of stories since our kid grew up, so that was about 10 years, 12 years ago. Since we are going to cover this book, I started to read this and realized that it's not just a story about animals. It's a story about everything. It's a story about the world around us, about people, about nations, about states, about kings and presidents and prime ministers, about power, about exercise of power, about laws, good laws, bad laws, and such. And every story is no more than about a few pages, and every story has important lessons. And rather than read it from the beginning to the end, I said, okay, I'm just going to read it randomly. And I told Nitin earlier that what I have done is I have selected about 3-4 of my, not favorite, but stories which I thought are most relevant to the times that we live in. And so that's what we are going to do. That I'll read a small section from one of the stories, and then Nitin will tell the story that we have, involving all kinds of animals, from lions to vultures to snakes to anything else. So that's going to be the format for today's book discussion. But the way this book came out, which is there's a story behind the preservation of this book, and since none of you would have probably read the book, I thought I would begin with first by welcoming Nitin, of course, to the International Center Goa. He's coming here after a gap of about, it tells me, about 6-7 years. So welcome, Nitin, and we'll begin with the story of how you found and how you got your hands on the manuscript for what is now translated as the Nitopadesha in Singapore, and that too in Singapore. I mean, not here in India. Over to you.
Thanks, Pushkar. What you must know, first of all, is this book is entirely a work of fiction. Everything is fiction. From the front cover to the back cover is fiction. So that's something I must preface my remarks by telling you that this is fiction. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be in a room where more than half the population seems to be below the age of 18 or below the age of 20. And I'm delighted to be in a room where that population is young women. Because a lot of the stories in this book have very strong young women as the lead characters. In a way, the stereotype of old stories is that usually there is a prince or a king, and he's doing everything, and the female role is only for glamour. There's this glamorous woman he wants to marry, or this girl who has to kiss a frog to make him become a prince or whatever. Other than a few of those stories, most characters in most of these stories are male young men who do a lot of interesting things. But in these books you would find quite a lot. I suppose there's a gender balance. Almost 50% of the, maybe just more than 50% of the stories have very strong young women or young female animals as the main characters. So I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad I hope that there are stories here that will inspire you in your day-to-day activities to become leaders and to not fall for the old stereotype of women having to just become glamorous and fade into the scenery, but actually be leaders who are capable of doing things.
So, beginning with, how did you come across
How did this book come out? So the first story is really about the story of how the translator gets hold of this manuscript. So I was after quitting my job in the Singapore government, I was floating around the Institute of South Asian Studies in Singapore. And one day, this must have been some conference like this. One day I was waiting for a taxi outside, and there's this Afghan man, long beard, pakul cap, what they used to call the Mujahideen cap, it's called the pakul cap, that was waiting there looking lost. Then he looked at me and he said, "Hindi?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Hindi." Hey, he says, almost he wanted to hug me. I didn't hug him right there though. So he said, "How do I go to the library?" So I'll show you how to go to the library. I was taking a taxi, so I take this guy with me in the taxi. Then he finds out my name is Nitin, that I'm setting up an institute called Takshashila Institution and so on. His eyes he becomes very excited. And when I get off at the library, he gives me this hug, this hug, tightly. I said, "Okay." And Nitin of Takshashila, I'll be seeing you around. So we were very, very grateful and very happily he went. Then a few weeks later, I think I get one parcel from Afghanistan. But I was packing to come to India, so I didn't open it. So what happens in this story is that during COVID, I open it and I find that there are some scripture or some language which I didn't know. So I pass it to a friend, a computer science person, who uses artificial intelligence to translate it. Finds out that it's in a language called Tokharian, and he translates it. And this is the translation. So there is a ChatGPT translation which comes first, and then I look at it and then I make some changes and amendments and so on. So that's the story of how I got hold of this manuscript.
So, how old are these? How old are these? Is the manuscript? I mean, there's something I think Vivek Debra, who wrote the introduction, puts it at around 6th century AD or thereabouts.
It's really hard to tell. One of the things I found, in fact, I didn't read many of India's classic texts, etc. Sanskrit. I'm not Sanskrit educated, so I can't read it in the original, right? So I always read translation and critiques. And what you find is that the Indian way of writing stories is never to claim ownership. You never, even if you've come up with some great new story, you never claim that it's your own. You claim that it's part of an older book which was already there. So even the Bhagavad Gita, for example, is seen as a later addition into the Mahabharata. There are parts of the Bhagavad Gita which were added later. So it all doesn't happen. So if you look at the Mahabharata as a story, it starts with some story of people fighting 3000 years ago in a small epic called Jaya. Right? And then that story, Jaya, becomes a story called the Bharata, where more masala is added. And as more and more masala is added, it becomes Mahabharata. Right? So that's the way, knowledge was always transmitted in. Nobody claimed authorship. Nobody said, "I wrote it." So even of the authors that we know, you will have a name called Vyas. No. Who's this Vyas? Is this one person or many persons? Right? We don't know. So I don't think you can date these things, because there are very, very modern ideas in this. Very post-enlightenment ideas in this. But there are also very ancient ideas in this. So it's hard to place.
No, and what you said is quite true. I mean, while reading the stories themselves could be from any time. But and that's what I was wondering. The translation, whether it was the translation, they come out the way they do because of the translation. I'm going to read from one of my favorite stories, I think, which is The Mongoose Who Was Wise and Just. And when I read it out to you, just pay attention to, what, I mean, that's why I asked Nitin, when do you think these were written? Because the idea there is very, very contemporary. Okay, so just bear it.
So let me just preface this
Yeah.
story. So this story is part of another story. So what happens in this book is like it's like the Panchatantra or the Arabian Nights. There's a story within a story within a story. So the frame story of what he is going to say is there are two crows. A crow called Rajni Datta wants to marry this very beautiful crow called Chandramani. Now this Chandramani, so he goes to Chandramani and says, "Will you marry me?" So Chandramani says, "Look, I can't marry any crow which comes along. I mean, I need to be sure of you. So can you bring me a jewel? One of the Navaratnas, bring me a jewel, and then I'll marry you." So he said, "Can you give me 100 days?" So she says, "Okay, 100 days later, 100 or 90 days, we'll meet at this particular tree." And in the 100 days, he goes to various parts of the world and he has many adventures and he learns many stories. So when he comes back after 100 days, I won't tell you what happens, but he tells all these stories to Chandramani. So one of the stories he's telling Chandramani is this story which he's going to tell.
Knowing that power corrupts its holders, the fathers of many happy realms divided it among different offices so that one can check the other. All in the realm are equally subject to its laws. The chief, the lawmakers themselves, magistrates, soldiers, merchants, and citizens. That is why the wise have said that the Janpadas are superior to kingdoms, for power is so diffused in Janpadas that it cannot corrupt anyone to such an extent that they become a threat to their fellows. A king, on the other hand, is usually free to do what he pleases, and often is above the law. This allows power to corrupt him. But even in the lands where power is checked and the rulers subject to the law, there is a vital force that protects freedom, happiness, and prosperity. That vital force is criticism. Citizens must be alert to the doings of their rulers and not lose a moment to check the smallest transgressions of officials before it is too late. Criticism is like a small prod that keeps even mighty elephants in check. The sharper it is, the less it needs to be used. I'll end here. But the basic idea is that, power corrupts. Now that itself is an old idea perhaps. But how can you possibly check power? Through criticism. That I'm not sure whether that would be a more contemporary idea, because if you go back to the days of kings, surely, criticism was not something that many kings would have tolerated.
Yeah, so this book is actually, if you see the frame story, it's set in a place called Chakrapuri, which is a Janapada. A Janapada is not a kingdom, right? Janapada is some kind of a republic, some kind of a place which has accountable government. Lot like Goa actually, where you have a lot of panchayats. You have more panchayats and doing well in Goa than in any other part of the country. So in a way, it's like that. So what they find is that the kids of that Janapada are not paying attention to their civic duties. So the parents call this crazy guy called Nitin to teach them. So and Nitin tells all these stories. So what he's trying to bring out in this particular story is that you must be critical of anyone who's holding power. Even if you like that person. Because the sharper your criticism is, the more that person stays in life. So the story which happens is like this. There is a king called Durguna who's a lion, and he was a notorious. Let me just read this out. Okay, in the middle of the great southern river, there is an island by the name of Auravela. It was ruled by the notorious lion Durguna, whose depredations got worse by the day. The terror he created in the minds of his subjects was the basis of his rule. This he reinforced at regular intervals through arbitrary acts of cruelty and caprice. 4 jackals were his ministers, sidekicks and principal enforcers, carrying out all kinds of atrocities in his name. First, Durguna demanded that he be carried around on the back of an elephant, of the tallest elephant Balagaja. Then, he forced all the monkeys to wash and clean him every day. All animals were to prostrate themselves when he passed by. Those who failed to do so would be thrown into the river and have their property confiscated. All this they endured until one day Durguna ordered each animal must send him one of its offspring as a special tax. Mother Hare decided enough was enough and she would not put up with Durguna's misrule anymore. So it's a woman, Mother Hare, who stands against oppression. Others were inspired by her courage and thus began the revolt. The animals marched to Durguna's seat and demanded that he revoke all his oppressive demands. This he refused and threatened to order his enforcers to attack them. So basically, he refuses. Finally, the animals did not move back an inch. That was when Balagajas, the elephant's mother, moved forward and calmly sat down in front of Durguna, shielding his subjects. The tyrant realized that the game was up and promised to mend his ways. The people, the subjects, however, had enough of him and threw him into the river. So the old atrocious ruler has been thrown out after a revolution. After their bad experience with kings, the animals decided that they will elect their leaders instead. That was how Vanaketu the mongoose became the chief of Auraveda. He promised a benevolent rule, assuring freedom, equality, and justice for all. For a few months, everybody revelled in the heady atmosphere of the mongoose's administration. Then, one day, the 4 jackals quietly approached Vanaketu, the new ruler. Bending low in submission, they said they would be honored to serve their new master just as they served the old one. After all, administering a realm was no easy task, and their counsel, skills, and experience would be an invaluable asset to the new chief. Besides, they could also help him with his re-election. Vanaketu thought, these jackals are untrustworthy, but I think they'll be useful to me. So he agreed to employ them. No one raised their voice because they respected Vanaketu and they knew that he was wise and just. Then the jackals suggested that Vanaketu would be able to perform his duties better if he could move faster from place to place. For this to happen, other animals would be required to clear the road whenever he approached. Vanaketu agreed. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and knew that he was just and wise. Next, the jackals exhorted Anugaja to volunteer to carry Vanaketu on his back. For what a privilege it was for the young elephant to be the leader's mount. And what a privilege it was for the little monkeys to wipe their leader's body clean. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and they knew that he was just and wise. A thought then occurred to Vanaketu that since he was their chosen leader, perhaps the animals could bow to him to show their respect, not to him but to his high office. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and they knew that he was just and wise. Then, one day, after a review of the realm's finances, the jackals proposed a special tax on everyone. Each animal was to put at their leader's disposal just one of its offspring every year. Vanaketu agreed. No one objected because they respected Vanaketu and knew that he was just and wise.
I mean, this is a masterful story about the effect of power. You have a perfectly reasonable, democratic, decent guy, and becomes exactly like a wolf.
Yeah. And this is what happens in this conversation between the 2 crows who discuss this story. So the crow, Chandramani, asks him, wasn't it because of these jackals, the 4 guys who were previously, the previous administration who have joined, these are the guys who spoiled the new guy. So what Rajnidatta says is that the jackals are just a manifestation, they are a metaphor for power. Because whether you have the jackals or not, once you have absolute power and no one is criticizing you, you will do this. And that's the adage which, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you can have, judiciary, parliament, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, separation of powers, administration, etc. All of these are nice designs. But as Ambedkar said, a constitution is only as good as the people called upon to administer it. If the people don't do what they are supposed to do, then the best constitution won't save you. Right? So what here in this particular story is one of the most important duties of the praja, most important duties of citizens, is to criticize those in power. Criticism doesn't mean personal attacks. You should do criticism. For example, at Takshashila, we criticize government policy. It's not that you criticize a person for being bad or for being corrupt, etc. Right? You criticize the policy. You say, look, you have introduced a maybe a water pricing system. This is bad. These are the problems which this thing has. There are good things also. You mentioned the good things, but also mention the bad. Because the moment you stop criticizing, it goes into their head, and very quickly you get a very dramatically negative outcome.
The second story, which I really liked and which I think really resonates with things around us. This is how the cat and the hen set their house on fire. When people create notions of superior and inferior, they sow the seeds of division, discrimination, and oppression. Once created, such notions are perpetuated beyond time or sense or justice. For those who wish to surrender, for who wishes to surrender advantages they get by birth. Once created, such notions destroy the soul of society and create cycles of oppression that are endless unless they are stopped. Nay, we should neither accept nor make any claims of superiority. For if the cat and the hen, and we'll go to the story now, for if the cat and the hen had accepted the principle of equality, their lives would have been longer, if not happier.
Okay, so this story is part of a bigger story where there is a family of frogs which goes on a world tour. So it so happens that in this place called Paripurna, there lived a tribe of frogs whose grand uncle was a grand old frog named Kuntaka. All the frogs lived comfortable, contented and happy lives, for the pond catered to all their needs. Few ever had a reason to venture far from their home. Of course, the frogs were aware of how big the world was and of the amazing creatures and plants in other parts. It was just that they were not inclined to travel much, with one exception. Once in their lives, all frogs who had come of age were entitled to go on a tour of the entire world. Only those who had the curiosity and the courage took up this adventure. It would take them 7 days and 7 nights to hop their way around the world and back. Upon their return, they would be regarded by everyone as frogs of high esteem. Such frogs wore around their necks the orange shells they found on the other side of the world to remind everyone of their great achievement and exalted status. So, these frogs, they used to go when they became 18 years of age or when they had reached adulthood, the frogs would go. But here's the thing. Having attained the age of majority, Surasundari and her cousins, Jalpada and Gangadatta, were full of enthusiasm for the tour of the world. When the day arrived, they went to the smooth red rock from where the great uncle Kuntaka would send them off. Grave was Kuntaka's face and weighty was his demeanor. Upon learning of their purpose, he said, he says, this is a big world, there are all dangerous things happening here, so there are so many, you need to be courageous, all of this. Then Surasundari says, oh grand uncle, we have heard, then he says, when the two of you go, you must be very careful. So Surasundari says, oh grand uncle, we have heard you and are grateful for your warnings, but there are 3 of us who want to go. Then he says, no, only the boys go. Gangadatta and Jalapada go, Surasundari you don't go. Because it's not the tradition for females to go. He says, you Surasundari must go back home, for it is not tradition for females to go. Besides, my dear young lady, this enterprise is not safe for you. Travel and adventure are the province of males, for they require strength, wit and courage, not for females, who might not possess these qualities or the capacity to bear pain. Such has been the way of our tribe from time of the very first grand uncle, for good reason I should add. Go back home, young Surasundari, and await the return of your cousins. So basically this frog called Surasundari, she is not allowed to go. And it so happens that she finds a way to go because there's something happens. So that's when you read the book, you'll find out how she manages to go. So the 2 cousins actually go out, but she gets to have a much bigger and much richer adventure, and she's actually the heroine of the story. So one of the stories which she encounters is this, which you mentioned. The cat and the hen set their house on fire. Near the great desert, there is a small town by the name of Samadhana. and the outskirts of which there lived a cat named Daruhasta and a hen named Vidala. Okay, so basically the cat and the hen, they live in this house, and one day the cat decides that the cats are superior. He says cats have 4 limbs. He says, after all, cats are 4-legged creatures who perform very useful and important tasks. We protect the house from vermin and are known to bring good fortune to the inhabitants. That is why we cats are always assigned the place indoors, because they are superior. It appears that the humble place that you have, he tells the hen, is because you are inferior. After all, you have only 2 legs and your wings don't carry you far. Your life needs to be protected from foxes and jackals, and your habits are most unclean. That is why you were meant to live outdoors. Okay? So he tries to lord over the hen. So the hen after a while gets upset, and the hen says, here these hens perform important functions for the household. Hens rid the house of worms and harmful insects. Hens provide food and sustenance to the house. The cats do not. Hens earn money for the household by giving their very lives. Cats do not. Hens guard the house from 4-legged predators by sounding early warning, often at the cost of their very lives. Cats know only how to flee. It is clear that between the cat and the hen, it is the hen that is more important. That is why it is the hen that should have the higher status. Clearly, it is I who deserve the lofty place. So the cat lives in the loft. It is I who deserve the lofty place that you currently occupy. So please vacate. So the hen wants the cat to move out of the loft, and the hen wants to sit there. So they quarreled constantly over this. One night, Daruhasta, who's the cat, decided to finish the matter by burning the hen's hut. It was outside, right? So much the better if she was inside it. So he just wants to kill her by burning her. He took a flaming torch and burnt the hut to the ground. When he went inside the house, he was surprised to see Vidala the hen coming down from the loft with a flaming torch in her hand. The smoke from the roof told him that his loft was up in flames. They both rushed out of the house to save themselves from death. Each ordered the other to fetch water from the well to put out the fire. They could not agree on who should take orders, nor when and where to douse the flames. Thus, their house burnt down and became a heap of ashes. Then, in the quiet of the night, they heard the bloodthirsty howls of the approaching predators. So what this story is saying is about this idea of relationships between communities, groups of people, races. You'll be seeing this in Israel and Palestine, which is happening now, or in Russia and Ukraine. I mean, it happens internationally, it happens nationally, it happens within a state, it happens within a locality. Sometimes it happens within families also. There are some groups who think that they are good, they are superior, and there are other groups who think that, who are told that they are inferior. But that's not all that happens. In many times when there are revolutions, the one who is at the bottom now says, I'm on top. This is that classic Israel and Palestine thing, right? So, some time ago somebody oppressed me, and now I'm on top. When I'm on top, what do? I oppress the other person, right? So there is this cycle of oppression and thing which goes on, because people have a sense of I'm superior and inferior. But I always give the example of something like, okay, maybe I'll do, maybe I can use this cup. Is there anything in the cup? No. So what happens is, imagine there is a community here. Okay, there's a community here. Maybe this is the cat and this is the hen. The cat is on top and the hen is at the bottom. So people think, oh, this is unfair. So the hen says it's unfair. We have to change it. So the correct way is like this. The hen is on top. But what happens when the hen is on top? The cat goes to the bottom. So you've repeated the same problem, but now there's a different up and down. So what is justice? Justice is this, when they are both on an equal footing. So I think that is the principle which is trying to be brought out here. That who is superior, who is inferior, and changing the inferior to superior and inferior to superior just changes the cycle and creates this problem for the next generation. So the best thing to do is to be horizontal. Right? So that's the story which Surasundari discovers when she talks to somebody else. So Surasundari goes on to have many interesting adventures, including saving the world. So you should read it. It's my favorite. It's my favorite set of stories in the whole book.
Okay, so while reading this story, I just thought, okay, what if I sort of build upon it to illustrate the idea that where you say that I'm superior and you're not, or somebody else is, no, I'm superior. So imagine the hen and the cat living together, more or less, and getting along just fine. And then the radio is invented, right? And whoever invents the radio, maybe it's the lion, maybe it is somebody else, and this group basically decides, okay, we are all animals here, we are all human beings here, and and this is the sort of hierarchy we should have. These guys, the lion is the most superior, and then there is the elephant, and then there is somebody else, and there is somebody else, and the cat comes here and the hen here. And even though the cats and hens, in the plural, never thought of themselves as much different from each other, they lived next door, but once the radio is invented and they listen to all these ideas on the radio that the cat is superior to the hen, and that's where all hell breaks loose, right? I mean, the role of the media, the role of radio, right from the beginning, used for spreading both good ideas and terrible ideas, which lead to these kinds of hostilities.
Yeah. So, what I would like, because I mentioned Israel and Palestine in this conversation, because that's a hot topic. Everybody is, when the British were leaving Palestine in 1947-48. There were many options of what should happen later. So, of course, the Israelis, the Jews and the Arabs said we can't live with each other, so we need to have two different states, Israel and Palestine. So it was called the two-state solution. But when it was put up in United Nations, the Nehru government, India's government, actually opposed this. They were in favor of a one-state solution, which is federal in nature, where both Palestinians and Israelis live in the same state. And of course, this was shot down. It was outvoted. Of course, the two-state solution, Israel's independence was upheld because the Americans and the British were all in favor. But if you look at what the Indian government was trying to do then, this is the Gandhi, it's the ethos of our Indian freedom movement, is that pluralism is a better idea than separation. Pluralism is an idea where people of multiple races, social hierarchies, ethnicities, learn to live together. That living together is not always comfortable, but there is tolerance. It is not comfortable. There are always within a family we know, I have 3 children and I can tell you that it's not comfortable for 3 children to even agree on what music should play or what food should be eaten. So there's always tension. So when you can't sort it out within a household, how can you sort it out between Israel and Palestine? So you will have. But the whole idea is that if you believe that the idea of pluralism is important, everybody has an equal right to stay, have an equal claim on the resources, then of course people will adjust based on their levels of tolerance. Some will fight, some will kill, some at the border, some people will feel, we are all living together, but we are still the superior community. You can believe whatever you want, but the law treats you as the same. Legally there is no superior and inferior. So I think that model and I've written about it recently also, that model of living is the model for the 21st century. Not just for India, but for the whole world. Because if you start going by saying, this national self-determination, we speak this language, we have this God, therefore we want to have our own country. We want to have our own president, our own flag, our own army. It is endless, no? Because let's say you look at Karnataka. Okay, Karnataka says, Kannada is a different language, we want to separate from India because we are a nation. So the Kannada nation separates. But then you realize in Kannada there is Tulu, there is Konkani, there is southern Karnataka which speaks a different type of Kannada, and there is a northern Karnataka which speaks a different type. So you split it into 4. Then within the 4 you realize that within the Konkani there is a Uttara Kannada Konkani and there is a South Kannada Konkani, and then you split. Then you keep splitting, and you keep fighting until you split. There is no end to this. Okay? So living as a large India-style federation where everybody has equal rights is the way to go. And this is actually, in a way, reflected in this book also, is that we have traditions of pluralism. Pluralism is not invented in 1947. pluralism is as old as Indian civilization and culture. You know, how many of you know about Jains? Those who know about Jain, can you please? Have you heard of the Jain religion? How many of you have heard of the Jain religion? Okay, so when we were in school, most things we know about Jain religion. Are there any Jains here? No, okay. This is quite common, right? It's the smallest minority in the country. When we go to school and we learn about Jains, what are we told about Jains? Jains are fiercely vegetarian, right? They don't, they wear a mask sometimes to prevent the germs from going in. There are two types of Jains, Shwetambar and Digambar, right? And they worship Lord Mahavir. That's it. Do you know anything more about Jains? No, right? But here's the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing about Jain philosophy is this idea called Anekantavad. Anekantavad means anti-one-sidedness. What the Jains say is that all standpoints, all perspectives are valid and legitimate. You can believe that the world is flat. You can believe in science, you can believe in Ayurveda, you can believe in modern medicine, you can believe in this politician, you can believe, they believe all gods, all paths are legitimate. Okay? That's why you have the story of the elephant and the blind man and the elephant. That's actually an Anekantavada story. There is an elephant and each person has only a limited perspective of the whole elephant. Nobody knows what the elephant looks like. Only Lord Mahavir knows because he is omniscient. Right? So the purpose of human existence, if you want, is to rise yourself to a level where you can see the whole elephant. But they accept all philosophies to be legitimate. Nobody is wrong. Only thing they say is you can't claim that only you are right. The Gita, now very interesting, right? Bhagavad Gita, everybody reads Bhagavad Gita and says this is what God told us. The interesting thing about Gita is it is a way to synthesize multiple paths, because at the time when the Gita was being composed, there was this, some people who believed in bhakti, some people believed in karma, some people believed in yoga, and they were all fighting with each other. So this Krishna, who is this main character in Gita, brings all this together and says all these are the correct ways, they all lead to me. Only stupid people think that they are right. All the leads to, of course one of them is a better way, but all of these lead to me. So I think we have to be thinking in terms of pluralism, which is very, very Indian. It is much more Indian than any other philosophy that I have found in my researches. The idea that all methods are acceptable, we just have to tolerate them. You don't have to accept that they are right. Nobody is asking you to accept that the other side is right. Just tolerate that. Just like how you are tolerating me.
So Nitin and I, just before coming here, we were talking about two other stories, and Nitin thought that the story, the Queen and her employees, is something which we could use today for the session. But what I had in mind was that we have students coming, and for that reason I had looked at the case of the three heirs. As a very interesting story. Maybe we could take up both depending on how much time we have. And I know that some of you came late. So what we are doing with this book is it consists of a bunch of stories about different animals interacting with each other and stories within stories. And each story has lessons for us. About living together, about accountability, about justice, good laws, bad laws, citizenship, governance, kings, democracy, and all. So, can we possibly do both if you have, if you feel up to it? Okay. Which one first? The one about.
We'll do the cranes. It's very short.
Okay. So, the Queen and her employees, and I'll just quickly read a small section of it. Bad rules destroy the moral moorings of society. Once people lose respect for a bad rule and those who made it, it spreads to other rules, even if they are good ones. Thus it becomes difficult to distinguish right from wrong, and the worldly will adopt the route that is expedient. In such a realm, those without scruples will be seen to succeed. Once that happens, all is lost. For the successful are widely copied. So it's a
So this is again this Rajnidatta, the crow. Remember, he had to give Chandramani a Navaratna, right? So this is one of his travels. So what happens in that story is that Rajnidatta, the crow, is flying all around India, all around the subcontinent, and he arrives in the seaside city of Kaju Pranta. So you can guess where this city is. Damani the crane became the proprietress of a famous eatery in the seaside city of Kaju Pranta after the retirement of her mother Shramani, who had started the business many years before. So Damani, she becomes the owner because her mother Shramani had started it. So Shramani had been running it for many years. So the establishment had 3 employees: Jiva Prada the turtle, Ratnakala the crocodile, and Yada Yada the frog. The customers would pay in copper coins after eating their meals, which the employees would put into an earthen pot put next to the boss's seat. The pot would be opened at the end of every month, and after paying the employees' wages and the suppliers of grain and green, the old proprietress would keep the rest. The business returned a modest profit year after year, and everyone was generally happy and satisfied. A few months after the daughter, Damani, took over, Ben Bisiji the crab said to her, "Your food is excellent and your reputation is good, but somehow your profits are lower than they should be. I have seen many businesses improve when they introduce more discipline in everything they produce." Thus inspired, Damani gathered her staff and said, "Everyone should wake up an hour before dawn and wash themselves with cold water infused with the petals of fresh jasmine. Otherwise they'll be dismissed from my employ." The employees were startled by this but nodded their heads, rolled their eyes and said, "Yes, yes, we'll do as you say." When Damani checked the following morning, Jivaprada replied, "Mistress, I solemnly declare that I follow your instructions." The others noticed that about the turtle there was no scent of jasmine whatsoever. Some days later, Damani gathered her staff again and said, "Everyone should abstain from visiting the Ox's tavern at night and refresh themselves with the water of fresh coconuts only, else they'll be dismissed from my employ." The employees were dismayed by this, but nodded their heads and rolled their eyes and said, "Yes, yes, we'll do as you say." When Damani questioned her the following morning, Ratnakala replied, "Mistress, I solemnly declare that I follow your instructions." The others noticed that the crocodile's hiccups were somehow stronger than usual. A few days later, Damani gathered her staff and said, "Everyone should sing this song at dawn, noon and dusk to demonstrate our dedication to this fine restaurant, else they'll be dismissed from my employ." The employees were confounded by this, but nodded their heads, rolled their eyes and said, "Yes, yes, we'll do as you say." When Damani asked him about this the following morning, Yada Yada the frog replied, "Mistress, I solemnly declare that I follow your instructions." And at noon, they all sang the song that was required of them. A month thus passed, and it was time to open the earthen pot in which the money used to be kept. To Damani's shock, she found that there was less than half of what they usually got. Then she asked them the following morning, they swore, "Mistress, we solemnly declare that we followed your instructions." Then, giving each other knowing looks, they went about their work. It's a little, you see what is happening here? The Damani, she made rules which were meaningless, they were absurd. And there was no way she could enforce it also. One person, she says, "You should wake up before dawn and bathe with jasmine petals." How are you going to enforce this? How are you going to check that that person has actually taken the shower? You can ask, and that person would not have done it. So it's an unreasonable law, unreasonable rule. The person would not have followed it. But then when you ask this person, the person will lie. Say, yeah, I actually showered in jasmine petals. So that person gets used to telling a lie. Similarly, the other story is that don't drink alcohol at the Ox's tavern. No, this person is used to drinking in his own free time. So now you say, "Don't drink." And then in the morning you check, say, "Did you drink?" He says, No, I didn't drink. Because that person again gets used to lying. Singing the song. Singing the song is seen as a way to show your dedication. Right? But you can sing the song, but after a while singing the song becomes the thing you do. You don't have to be really dedicated. Right? So what this story is saying is bad rules, or rules that require you to perform and show something, create liars, create untruthfulness in people, and dishonesty in people. Once dishonesty comes, for example, in talking about whether you bathed or whether you drank alcohol, once you start lying and becoming dishonest, you might become dishonest in money also. Right? So, and that's how it happens. The moral of the story is you made people dishonest. So, as you said, the moral of the story is bad rules which can't be enforced can destroy society. This is also the conversation we were having about corruption. When you have a rule which you can't enforce, I must tell you this. I was just telling him this before. Here's an example of a real bad rule. So one of my friends was setting up a microbrewery in Bangalore many years ago. So when he went to get the microbrewery license, you had to get many licenses. Two important licenses are excise license, which you pay for how much alcohol you produce. The other license is for shops and establishments, so that you can have a shop. So under the Excise Act, you can have only one door, because he has to count how many bottles are being shipped out. Right? In Goa, you would have seen there's an excise label. So they have to look at that gate. They have to put, so that you can have only one door. Under the Shops and Establishments Act, for fire safety, you must have at least two doors. Okay. So one law says you can have at most one door, maximum one door. Another law says you can have minimum two doors. You must have minimum two. So how do you comply? So when you have laws like this, obviously corruption happens. You solve problems like this by corruption. Once corruption happens, people learn to be dishonest. Dishonesty sorts goes through the system. Right? So what is saying is that we should always be careful about not making unreasonable rules. So there are of course stories. Chandramani goes and analyzes this. It's a very interesting conversation. You should read.
So Nitin, again, I'll use this story to talk about something larger than restaurant owner and our employees. Now the employees, instead of employees, you could have citizens in the country, and the Prime Minister, the President, who says, well, from now on this is what you are supposed to do, and a month later this is what you are supposed to do. It just won't work. Is it not? I mean, that's the larger idea.
Yeah. The classic example is of licensing. You might have seen licensing of the food vendors on the street. I don't know whether it's there in Goa or not. In many cities there is something called a licensing of the food vendor. So only when that person has a license, you can be a food vendor. Now, there are thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people who sell food on the street. They are not all going to get license. But if you insist that that person has a license, what will happen? The inspector or the police will go and ask this person, do you have a license? He says no. And then what do? The police will get that as a corruption, right? Or the inspector will get that as a bribe. And this person also will realize that it is easier to bribe than to get a license. So both sides will become corrupt. That is your story. As a citizen, the biggest reason why we have corruption is because we have rules like this. And if you remember criticism, we don't criticize those bad rules. So we accept all the rules which come. Then we say, rule aayega to dekha jayega. Because if it's rule anyway, I'll give a bribe and I'll sort it. Why should I protest?
One recent example exactly from your story is Uttarakhand government have just announced that you're allowed to have bars at home, but you should not drink on dry days at home.
Yeah.
How are you going to find out if somebody is drinking on a dry day?
No, that's I completely agree.
So this is the way.
Yeah. And in fact, many of the rules now are made specifically for this reason, so that you can't comply. And because when you can't comply, there is corruption, right? So I urge you to protect Goa from going this way. Many states in this country have gone this way and come to dangerous situations. Please protect Goa. Please protect your homeland from going in this direction.
Okay, couple of things before we take some questions. Any kind of question. I know you haven't read the book, but if there is something you understood from one or more stories that we sort of talked about and lessons from them, that's one. But we have 5 copies of the Nitopadesha for you, and unfortunately, obviously, there are many more of you. And this will limit it to only the students, right? So the first 5 who have a question get to have a copy of the book, and you can get it later signed by Nitin over here, and he'll be happy to do that. So, questions, comments?
The first basic question, the title of the book is Nitopadesha. Is it resembling with Nitopadesh, or is it because of your name that you wanted to figure out?
Good question. But since you asked about Nitopadesh, let me give you the long one and then I'll answer you. You know, when I was, see, at Takshashila we teach public policy. Okay. We teach public policy, we've been teaching for the last, since 2012. The first course was born in ICG Goa. Okay, so since we've been teaching, we found that there are many books which tell the kings and the princes and the rulers what to do. So if you read Arthashastra, Arthashastra is a book meant for teaching the kings and the princes how to rule a kingdom. Then I thought Panchatantra might be something for people, right? Because when I grew up as a kid, we used to read Panchatantra. When you read the original Panchatantra, it turns out that Panchatantra is written for princes. It is meant as a textbook for princes' education. It is not meant for citizens' education. Then I read Hitopadesha. Hitopadesha is also the same. Then I read Jataka. Jataka is almost the same. So they have many books and stories written in Indian tradition, which are mainly meant to educate the princes. What we have as citizens is 6th standard civics textbook of NCERT or State Board. And those of you who have read that 6th and 7th standard civics textbook will know the question will be, what is the minimum age to become President of India? Now, that's absolutely useless, right? I mean, in school it's useful to pass, but as a citizen, it is useless. What can you do with that civics knowledge? You know, what is the controller and auditor general's powers? You know, what is the term of a Lok Sabha? I mean, these are just absolutely pointless. I mean, useful to some extent, but they don't tell citizens on how to be a good citizen. So, Nitopadesh is a book to tell us how to be good citizens. Both for adults and especially for younger people, it is how to be good citizens. Because only when we are good citizens, we can demand good governance. You know, people say Yatha Raja Tatha Praja, but actually the other is true in democracy. Yatha Praja Tatha Raja. Because who's the Raja? Raja is one of us. Because we don't know how to run our own city or our own country. Tomorrow we make one of you, Pushkar and Nitin, the President or Prime Minister. We are going to be the same. We are not going to do anything different because we also don't know. So, Nitopadesh is written, I think that's the motivation. As to why it's called Nitopadesh, I'll leave it to you to judge.
Or
It could be.
morality. Niti means morality as well.
It could be that also. I'll leave that to you to judge.
Good morning. This is Timur Shah from Goa University. I was on 2016 Takshashila batch. My question, actually, I have not read the book, but what I have heard in this session, it was very interesting and it is really related to my country. My question is that most of the terms which you have mentioned here, like pure Indian words, it will be difficult for a foreigner to know much more about the books. So my country is corrupted, politics, problems which we have there. I'm from Afghanistan. So do you have any plan to produce another version of these books for foreigners would be more understandable for that? I hope you got my question.
Yeah, thanks Timur. I'm happy to see you here. Timur and his friends were from the Afghan nationalist groups in Afghanistan under Amrullah Saleh. They were, some of the bravest and the most courageous people I have met because they were fighting against oppression of various kinds, fighting against religious fundamentalism and being very strong nationalists. And we can't imagine the kind of challenges people like Timur face in Afghanistan, especially in recent years. So I'm glad you asked this question. See, I think the plan right now is in English, is the only foreign language English is an Indian language actually. More people speak English in India than in any other country. So I don't think English is a foreign language. We should adopt it. I mean, the British can claim that they colonized us, we colonized the British language. So, yeah, I did for India. So please use Indian spellings and use prepone and all that. It's absolutely fine. You don't have to fight with the Queen's English. But English is the plan. But we plan to make this available in open source in some form in the coming years, where it can be freely translated into other languages. So, English is in a way a link to other foreign languages.
Lingua franca.
Sorry. I mean about the terms. For example, for line you have put a name in an Indian name. So for a foreigner it will be difficult to know what do you mean about that.
So what is the thing is maybe
Transliteration can be.
Yeah.
A very good morning, sir. So my question to you is, you said your book has been translated from the original language by AI. Now we do know that AI does lack natural language process or like cultural context or contextual nuances. What has been your experience working with a translated using AI? What has been your experience and yeah?
Well, all you could say is that I'll make a general comment. I'll give you an example of how I use AI and that will tell you. See, in many places where I have to give talks, previously, I don't write my speeches. I just write 4 or 5 points and say these are the main points I want to cover, and I keep it in my hand or in the phone. But after that, to publish it or somewhere, it's very hard because there are just 5 points nobody will know. So what I do now is I go to ChatGPT and say, write a speech of 400 words using these points. So it just makes something, then I have to review it to make sure it makes sense, and then I publish. I think that's the way to look at these tools. Because, I'm an engineer and I've worked with some of these things in the early generations. It's usually garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not careful, if you're not smarter than the machine which has given you, you can run into a huge amount of risks. Because it might use words and phrases which mean something and you don't know what it means, and then you get into trouble.
Some of the things with AI is very, very smart. I recently thought of an idea that a Gita story is being written where instead of Krishna is Buddha who is advising Arjun what to do. Arjun is confused what to do, and Buddha with his philosophy. And just this sentence, I just wrote this in ChatGPT, and it produced a 2-page story, and I put it in my groups, WhatsApp groups and all. No one could recognize that it was a AI, and it was really very well written.
But the duty is for us to look at it carefully before we release it to the public, because there might be several errors there which the machine doesn't realize, but we do.
I did have a question about Bhagavad Gita, because you mentioned that it was a different story and then grew. I totally believe that. It's about Krishna. Sorry. I think my voice was loud. Not a good throat today. Sorry. I'm just asking a question. Previous one was a comment about ChatGPT. So my question is about Bhagavad Gita. It's about character of Lord Krishna. When you actually go into the details of the timeline, people who have done research that it actually happened, Kurukshetra happened. It seems that Krishna as a child did all those things in Mathura till the age of 12. He left Radha at the age of 12. And then nothing happens for 77 years. And he was 89-year-old when Bhagavad Gita was being, so as part of the thing. And what do you think? Is it the same character? I mean, he has 108 names. So is it possible that it's an amalgamation of so many stories of people who were, a higher consciousness or much more skilled or whatever, and they were amalgamated into a story, into a character called Krishna?
Okay, so there are two ways to read Indian epics, right? Not just Indian epics, even books like the Arthashastra. There are two ways. One is a way that is consistent with the purpose for which these are written. Right? The purpose for even Nitopadesha, for example, is written for a particular purpose. So the purpose in Nitopadesha is to educate people about Prajadharma. So you just read it in that context of that purpose. So you don't ask, how old is it, who wrote it, whether AI is working, all of those are all irrelevant. So you just look at the stories and the meanings, and you have a criticism and a discussion based around the stories, the meanings, what is the author's intention, and so on. So that is a purpose-driven way of reading a text. The other way of reading the text is what I would call critical and scientific, where you are actually trying to see, was there a historical Krishna? Did this war take place? When did it take place? Who wrote this? Who made these changes? So that's a more of a what I would call scientifically driven inquiry, right? Critical inquiry. So it depends on which one you do, right? And what happens is there are a lot of tension when people don't understand that there are two ways. Because people for whom the Gita is the word of God. Let's say there are people who believe that Lord Krishna actually said these words, and these are his actual literal teachings. Now if you go to this person and ask this question, how could he have done it? He was 89 years old, maybe he was somebody else, maybe somebody wrote, then he gets upset. Said, how can you, how can you say these things about something which is important to me? Okay. So we have to be mindful of those things when we ask these questions. But it seems that in the historical, let's say scientific tradition, there seems to be a series of people called Vasudeva. So there was a Vasudeva cult somewhere around 100 BC to 100 to 200 AD, just around the turn of that century. About for 300 years, there was a Vasudeva cult in what is today Afghanistan, Peshawar, northwestern part of India. Where is the influence of the Greek Bactrians who ruled that place, the Hindus and the Tokharians and all of those things, the Persians. So there was a Vasudeva cult. And that Vasudeva is this person who was this miraculous person. And they believe that there were more than one Vasudeva. So it could be that, the young Vasudeva is different from the older Vasudeva. It could be. But there's no conclusive evidence either way. So the way we read these texts is that, don't worry about whether there was one Krishna, how old he was or whatever, right? The Gita is a book about, it's a philosophy. Focus on the philosophy, not on, what color iPhone Krishna had.
Thank you.
Sir, I am Sarika Mishra from DMC College. We have our students here, and we have a paper called as Folktales. So that was our reason why we come here, and we were very interested to listen to your talk. And I must say first thing that I was really very impressed with the ideas you have expressed, because that correlation between Hitopadesh, Jataka tales and all those things, that really teaches us about what are the rules for the people to follow, but what misses it on the common people, as they are never told what they are supposed to do. So my purpose of standing here is actually to talk about that, and really to appreciate it that yes, as common people we are never told what are we supposed to follow, and that is what is the reason of that cultural intolerance what we are facing in our society. And that idea of that what we can't manage it at home, of course that is the problem we see in our society. So we have always learned to actually point out the mistakes of others, and that's what I think most of us are doing, that what government is not doing, what others are not doing, but we have never been taught to look into ourselves and to see that what we are not doing. So I feel your book, although I have not read the book, but I feel your book Nitopadesh maybe giving us some sort of ideas and benefits, and let's say some sort of teachings and lessons which are related to the nitis. I think that is how it comes your name. That is what I interpreted the name Nitopadesh. The nitis, the policies which we should follow, and maybe we should be imbibing it in our life to learn the way of living as a citizen and in our society. So this is anything if you can add to that.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. In fact, what you mentioned just now towards the end, there's a story exactly about it. It's about what is dharma. It's not just doing what you are supposed to do. You know? In fact, Dr. Panandikar told me about the word dharma, what it means. Until about 5 years ago, I didn't know the meaning of the word dharma. Dharma, everybody uses, no? Dharma, Sanatan Dharma, the Raj Dharma, Praja Dharma, this, that. What does the word dharma mean?
According to me, dharma is what you should be doing, the right way to do the
Correct.
things.
But the actual meaning of the word dharma comes from the Sanskrit root word dhara. To is to dhara. In Konkani it is dhara, means hold.
Yes.
To hold together. Right? Dharma comes from the word dhara. To hold together. To what? Hold what together? To hold a relationship together. So every relationship has a dharma. Right? So me as a householder, as a family man, I have a dharma towards my family. As a citizen, I have a dharma towards to society and to my country. Right? As an engineer, I have a professional dharma towards my field as an engineer. Right? So dharma is, there are multiple relationships that a human being has, and you are supposed to do the right thing to hold that relationship together. That is dharma. Now, of course, there are so many different relationships. That is where the Gita comes in, right? So this guy is there, and he has, he's my uncle, he's my grandfather. I'm a kshatriya, I'm a prince. I've been wronged. I have a wife who's been wronged. All these things are there. What do I do? That's why Bhagavad Gita tells you how to interpret dharma. But there's one interesting thing about dharma is not just doing what is your dharma, but not doing what is not your dharma. That is a very important part of Praja Dharma. So there is a story in this where each person starts doing what the other person is supposed to do, because that person is not doing the job properly. Imagine you are in a college, okay, and you are in a group, and maybe you are playing cricket. That's a good one. You are playing cricket, and then you realize that the bowler is not doing the bowler's job properly. So you decide to bowl. And you might not be a bowler, but you feel that the bowler is not doing his job properly. So I will now take the ball from him and start bowling. Or the batsman decides that the wicket keeper is not doing his job. You start doing other people's job. You won't get a good team. A good team is when each person does his job properly. If he's a batsman, you do. If she's a fielder, she does the fielding. She's a wicket keeper, she does the wicket keeping. Don't try to do other people's job. So when you do other people's job, then you start getting nasty outcomes. One more point, since you talked about folk tales. India is supposed to have two big stories. Historically, in Indian tradition, there are two big stories. What are the two big stories? Ramayana and Mahabharata. Now, actually, there is a third one. It's called the Brihad Katha. Okay? Now, I'm sure, how many of you have heard of the word Brihad Katha before this? 1, 2. Very few people have heard of Brihad Katha. Brihad Katha is a story which does not have gods, it does not have religion, it does not have any of these. It's more like Lord of the Rings. It has wizards, it has elves, it has apsaras, and it has jadugars and all this. It is much bigger than all these other episodes. And there is a 1890 translation by a British person which runs into 100 volumes. You can get it on archive.org. Subsets of this things are like Katha Sarit Sagar. You might have heard of Katha Sarit Sagar. Yeah. So Katha Sarit Sagar is a subset. Panchatantra is a subset. Hitopadesh is a subset of this. So big text is called Brihad Katha. We have lost. Very few people have even heard of it. So if you are doing, if you want to do research in folk tales and all of that, I would suggest look at Brihad Katha. The text is available open source on archive. You can read 100 volumes of this and have fun. Very interesting stories are there in it.
Hi Nitin, thanks for
There's one person.
There is one person.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. So I'm a bit curious and I had a basic question. That is, I can't help but I can notice a bull on the cover page. Since you said the book comprises of stories of animals, but what made you choose the bull to make it to the cover page?
Thank you for asking that question. Because in this, there is one set of characters which appear in all the stories. In all the big stories, there's one set of characters. That is a buffalo, it's not a bull. It is a buffalo and two dogs. Okay, and I can tell you who they are. It's a really interesting one which you asked because the great buffalo and the two fearsome four-eyed dogs are resting on the banks of the Vetarani river after a long day of work. Their carts had carried them in all four directions. Do you know, can you guess who is this? Vetarani river, buffalo and two dogs? They are Yama's creatures. So Yama rides a buffalo and he has two dogs who do this. So that's that buffalo.
Thank you, sir.
You'll come and collect it at the end? No, you can.
That all of us as citizens can educate ourselves. I have a question in this postmodern world where while we can recognize these principles exist and we should abide by them or sort of follow them in our lives, what do you think is the function of facts that play a part in people deciding the way they need to behave, right? Clearly facts are very much open for interpretation and we can't seem to come on the same page at all, right? We are no longer reasonable given how siloed we've become. So what would be your advice to sort of bridge that distance given the world that we live in?
You asked a very good question. It's like saying how do you use insights from a book like this, right? Or how do you use the lessons that you get? See, I think one of the most important things for all of us in the coming future or even now is how do you decide what is a reliable fact? You know, because first of all there are fake news, people are deliberately putting fake news, fake facts. Now with artificial intelligence and deep fakes, people can, you know, make whatever they want. So how do you decide what is reliable and what is not? Right? What we have found through cognitive science is that we don't make decisions rationally. You know, the old story was, if you're a rational person, you will measure the costs and the benefits, you evaluate all those things, and then you'll use your brain and make the decision. But that doesn't happen. One of the ways it happens is, I'll give you an example. How many of you have bought a phone recently? Or, you know, in the last 2 years, have bought a phone, mobile phone? Oh, you're not allowed to have phones? Okay, how many of you have bought a phone in the last 10 years? So when you bought the phone, did you compare all the processing power, memory, USB, battery life, all of that? And buy it? Or did you buy it because someone told you it's a good phone, my friend also has the same phone, and it's been advertised by somebody? Which method did you use? The second method? Yeah. So that's called social proof. Okay? So what we have found is that people don't make decisions based on using their brain on a particular thing. You know, you don't see iPhone car, you know, what is the processor, what is the operating system, what is the price, how does it compare to the others and all. So like, oh, all my friends are using iPhone, so I also want an iPhone. You know? Or all my friends are using Samsung Galaxy, so I want to use Galaxy. So, if this is the way the brain works, how do you deal with finding reliable facts? One of the frameworks we suggest at Takshashila is what we call the RED framework. Okay. First is reflect. When you see something, when someone tells you something, don't immediately believe it. Reflect. You know, pause, reflect. If someone says, oh, this is the Palestinian terrorists killing babies, you know, don't immediately believe it. You know, reflect. Could it be true? Is this true? The second is educate yourself. You know, find out more. Now it's very easy to educate yourself. You know, go to Google, Wikipedia. You can find base level understanding of most things. You can educate yourself. And third is the most important, discuss. Discuss it with people who are your friends, who might not necessarily agree with you on everything. So for those of us who are married, it's very easy. Just discuss with the spouse. The spouse is more or less your friend and does not agree with you on most of the things. So you can always, if you're not married, if you're not married, this is an advertisement for marriage. Marriage is a good thing. And those of you who are married and you don't have children, I recommend that you have children, because children are also a good thing, because they always come back and disagree with you. So reflecting, educating and discussing with friends or family is a good way to come to reliable facts. Because what you do is you attack the other person's ideas and that person attacks yours. So you can see where the truth is.
Nitin, I've not read your book, definitely will be reading the book. But if you could comment on what is the similarity and difference between Nitopadesha and George Orwell's Animal Farm?
Thank you. In fact, there is a place called Orwell in this book. So, Animal Farm. See, I think both Nitopadesha and Orwell's Animal Farm use the device of animals and fables to disconnect you from current day politics. Because if you use human beings, especially in India, people will start reading. If you have a person whose name is Nitin Pai, who's the character, then they say, who's this Nitin Pai? He's Konkani, he's Brahmin, he speaks English, and all of those goes into the minds of the people. And then he might be pro this party, he might be pro that party. All of that goes into the minds of people, and people don't take the message. People start wondering who's the messenger, what is the identity of the messenger, the dress of the messenger, and all of the story of the messenger, and that gets lost. So any story which has humans with names, you tend to get distracted. But when you use animals, that doesn't happen. There's no BJP, no Congress, no JDS, no Aam Aadmi Party. They are animals. But if you have a name, you say, is this a reference to this Congress person? Is this a reference to a BJP person or something? Those kind of things come. And I think Orwell does it for similar reasons. You don't want to specifically say that this is a story about this particular incident or that particular incident, because this type of incidents are general. They've happened in so many places at so many times. So I think that's the logic.
So Nitin, thank you so much for taking time out to discuss the stories in the book.